Right, well, let's talk about Genesis. Given the lukewarm showing of Mighty River and Meridian, how many mum and dad investors are going to take up this offer?
Well, we'll have to wait and see. The Minister of Finance will have more details tomorrow. But effectively, Genesis will mark the end of the program. I actually think it's been a very successful program. Those companies now have much better oversight, much greater transparency. That's good for us as the majority shareholders, still controlling at least 51%. And I think for New Zealand capital markets, it's been a useful thing to take place. And actually, we've got well over $4 billion to spend on some new assets that we don't have to borrow money for.
Well, is there going to have to be, though, a big carrot to get people to take up this offer?
Well, there'll be an incentive in there, but there has been with Mighty River Power and Meridian. As stocks go up and down, so people have to take their own advice. But Meridian's trading above where people bought it. Mighty River Power actually has an embedded free option in there, or bonus share. So, it's not a million miles away from where it floated. They have quite high dividends and yields. So, look, I think for most people, they're probably quite happy.
$100 million now spent by the government and the energy companies in these floats. Is that money well spent?
Yeah, I mean, you have to put that all in a bit of perspective. I mean, there is a lot of either costs that the opposition want to add up that may or may not be real. But in the end, if we went and raised the better part of $5 billion, we also would pay costs to do that. But equally, if you go and have a look at Solar Energy, that was a company that at one point Treasury thought was worth about $3 billion. It wasn't part of the mixed ownership program. It didn't have proper oversight, in my view, and ultimately that led to a company that's essentially got no value at all now. So sometimes, saving money can, at least what people might argue is saving money, can in fact actually cost you a lot more money later on.
Prime Minister, why have you stopped? Why did you say you'd stop the asset sale program that's been so successful?
Well, because in essence, to take a company to the market as part of the mixed ownership model, it has to have the right characteristics. So it has to be large enough to warrant that kind of program. So if you take a company like Cordia, for instance, you couldn't realistically take it as part of the mixed ownership model because its value is very small. Or if it's an absolute monopoly, like Transpower, that really wouldn't make sense. So of the big ones that are left, you're really dealing with Television or New Zealand Post, and neither of those really have candidates for mixed ownership.
David Clark is saying that DHB is in a survival mode. How do you respond to that?
Well, it's a pretty ridiculous argument to make because if you look at, for instance, this DHB, in the 5.5 years that we have been in the government, they have hired more doctors here, more nurses, undertaking more surgical operations. The system is running better. When we came into power, the DHBs, I think, had a combined deficit of around about 200 million around the country. Now they're almost virtually back to surplus, which is square. So in the course of 5.5 years, under a National League government, we put more money into health every year, but certainly less new money than the previous government was, but we've had much greater efficiency. And I think it's a fallacy to argue that they're not doing well. In fact, they're doing very well. Of course, systems will break down from time to time, and there'll be issues. But the vast, overwhelming bulk of New Zealanders that I talk to, when they come into one of our tertiary care facilities like a hospital here at Dunedin, come away saying the staff are fantastic, the treatment was world class, they got everything they wanted, and they're extremely supportive of the system.
Can you just give us a response to what you've seen in there? What were your thoughts?
Well, the neonatal unit looks world class. I mean, you can see both the quality of the equipment and the infrastructure. It's a beautiful facility. And while you would want to have to go there because of the medical reasons that your child wouldn't be suffering, it would be very reassuring for parents to know that they've got that level of support. And also the care and love of the staff who are obviously very passionate about what they do. What's also clear having to go upstairs just to visit someone else's, there's a bit more work that needs to be done in the hospital. And that's part of ongoing capital work. So if you talk about the mixed ownership model and say, for instance, the money we got from Mighty River Power, Meridian, soon Genesis, for instance, $650 million of that is going into Christchurch Hospital, both new build and Burwood's redevelopment. Well, that's $650 million that we don't have to borrow. Maybe there'll be more money coming towards Dunedin. Clearly there's going to be a need here. And again, that may well be money that we just don't have to borrow as New Zealanders.
Waiting lists. I mean, let's face it, they're not doing well. I even got a letter recently saying they have more patients than they can cope with on the gynae list. So, waiting lists.
We can't talk about your own individual cases,
no, I know
those details, but actually around the country, waiting lists have been dramatically falling. It's one of the reasons why we undertook so many more elective surgical operations. So last year alone, there were 40,000 more than in 2008 when we came in. And that's off a base of about 120,000 elective surgical operations. So it's a significant increase. 40,000 extra people last year alone had referrals to their specialists over and above what had been happening 5 years ago. If you think about cancer care, in the time that I've been Prime Minister, we haven't actually had to send anyone to Australia for cancer care. And we're now down to a 4-week or less waiting list, which is sort of the gold standard internationally. So I'd kind of reject the view that we have some problem with our waiting list. But there's, in health, always a combination of waiting lists and sort of money issues that's everywhere around the world. But in fact, I think health system's been doing very well in the last 5 years.
So do you know specifically about the Dunedin hospital waiting list? Are you aware of the issues with it, or the numbers or the figures?
I've seen some, but if you want all the exact details, I can get them for you, but I'm not going to make ones that are.
David Cunliffe was on 19 this morning talking about the election.
Yep.
Said that Labor's expecting to get high 30s or 40%, and then they should be able to go to the Greens. Is that realistic? How seriously are you taking it?
Well, we take the opposition seriously because we're there to win an election, and any incumbent party that doesn't take its opposition seriously is both arrogant, out of touch, and at risk. Having said all that, I'm very confident in National's position, not just because the polls reflect strong support for the government, but because we'll go through the election with a very strong track record of what we've achieved, and not just in the economy, in law and order, health, education, all those areas are generally performing well. We'll also go with a lot of different and new policy ideas, and I think we'll go with a group of individuals who are very much in touch with New Zealanders. So we expect a strong fight from Labor and the Greens. It'll be a tight election, but I'm confident with that.
They're taking a kind of coalition approach now. Are you still expecting if National got the highest to get first dibs on forming government, or how does it work?
Well, there's no formal constitutional reason why a smaller party needs to do that. But on the other side, National is to have more than Labor, and small parties will to come and talk to us first and genuinely try and put together a government. I think a lot of New Zealanders would say there's something really wrong with the system. Since 1996, with the MMP, we've never had a situation where the largest party couldn't actually form a government.
Winston Peters hasn't provided evidence that tobacco plants is being sold to the Chinese. What do you make of that?
Well, I suspect he never will. Look, first I'd ever heard of anything about pocket watch being sold was when Winston Peters was trying to talk about it on Friday. I think he just sort of made it up. You really should stick to important issues that are factually correct. If he's got anything he'd like to tell us, he should feel free to provide the evidence, but I don't think he will.
How do you think he got it so wrong? He seemed confident when he announced it to his followers.
Don't know. Kind of playing his own navel.
The GCB is going to brief the Ombudsman on its Snowden intel on Friday. Would you see that it might be ordered to be made public?
No, I mean, the situation with Edward Snowden is that he has had access through his involvement with the NSA to a large amount of information that's in the public domain. That information is some information where New Zealand has involvement or access to New Zealand records because, as is well known, we are part of the Five Eyes, which includes the United States, the UK, Canada, Australia and ourselves. So we're aware of him being able to access information, but we don't necessarily have the records that he has, and they won't be able to provide anything to the Ombudsman. All they'll be able to do is advise the Ombudsman of what we know, which is that he's accessed that information, nothing which is new and publicly subject to the
What have you been told about what the GCSB has on Snowden?
I don't think they've got anything on Snowden. I think they just know that he's accessed that information illegally.
One more just on Winston Peters.
Yeah.
Could you work with a man who you say is making...
Well, this is MMP. I don't get to deliver political parties into the Parliament or not. That's for the New Zealand public to determine who they want there and who they don't. We've made it clear we work far more effectively with other political parties. But in the end, let's have an election and see what happens. My own view is if Winston Peters is in the position of determining who the next government will be, he will go with Labor and the Greens. But I'll tell you after the election.
Prime Minister, just one more question just on health thing.
Yeah.
We have the swine fraud allegations down here. Now, the health board's been in front of the select committee again with another money. Do you get concerned about those sorts of things?
Well, New Zealand taxpayers pay $14.7 billion a year into the health budget, and their expectations are that that money will be spent appropriately, correctly and lawfully. I don't have any of the particular details. I'm aware there's a dispute, but mine says it's a commercial matter. So if people have done something wrong, they'll be held to account. We have a proper system, and I expect them to be held to account. But like a lot of these disputes, I'm always a bit cautious about jumping in before we actually know what's going on.
Thank you.
Prime Minister, just on paid parental leave,
Yeah.
did Cabinet consider extending it yesterday?
No,